Welcome to Cardiac Pacing. You can find this on pages 84 and 85 in your Nurse Workbook 2.0. You can go ahead and print the pages below this video so you can fill it out with me. A great thing to do before you start this lesson is make sure that you've already watched our Understanding the EKG, since these videos are building upon itself. There we go over our P waves, what every single wave means, so that way this is going to be efficient to your learning. So let's jump in. Well, if we turn on our monitor and we start to see these little spikes that come up in our rhythm, this is going to give us that indication that a pacemaker is present. And we can find the answers to what exactly is being paced by looking at this rhythm strip and the spikes that are on it. So we remember that the SA node fires the impulses to tell the atria to contract, and this creates our first P wave. Well, in this example, we have this pacer spike that is present right before this first P wave. So this means that the pacemaker is becoming the SA node so it can stimulate the rest of the cardiac cycle. And this means we have a single chamber pacing. And in the next example, we're going to see that these pacer spikes are present during our PR interval. So this is after that P wave. So we know that our atrias have contracted, but this PR interval is that time frame that the AV node is delaying the impulse from hitting the cardiac circuit and sending the impulse down the bundle of His, down the Purkinje fibers, into the ventricles, and telling it to contract. So this is telling us that our SA node is firing appropriately, but it's blocked before the AV node. So the pacemaker is becoming the AV node to stimulate the rest of the cycle. And this is known as ventricularly paced. And lastly, we see that our spike is present before the P wave and after. So this is telling us that both our SA node and our AV node aren't firing correctly. And both of these guys need assistance. So we're gonna be calling this dual chamber paced. So we understand that there are different types of pacemaker devices. We also understand that there are different kinds of pacing. But what happens when all of this goes wrong or the pacemaker malfunctions? So there's something called failure to capture and failure to sense. So failure to capture means that the message is being delivered, but it is not received. Meaning that pacer spike is present because the pacemaker is firing as it should, but there's no QRS to even follow it. So the message is delivered, but it isn't received. Then we have failure to sense. And there are two types of failures to sense. There is under sensing, which means it doesn't recognize the patient's own beat. So this is causing bad timing. So it's sending the messages, but the timing is wrong. And then we have over-sensing. And this is when the pacemaker is reading waves and artifact as a sign not to pace. So the messages aren't even getting delivered because they're over-sensing that everything is okay. So why would a pacemaker fail to capture or fail to sense? We can have a number of issues here. So there could be the wrong voltage or sensitivity. We can also have improper positioning. We can have battery failure, or there could be that poor connection. Meaning it could be programmed or positioned within the cardiac chambers wrong, and there could be a potential battery failure on the pacemaker or poor connection. So think of this like a vacuum. If you're plugging it into the outlet in your wall and you're sweeping along and all of a sudden it comes loose out of the outlet, the vacuum's going to stop. So there's that poor connection. But once you go and shove it back into the outlet a little further in, everything starts working again. And before we go, we're going to have these two rhythms that are determining which problem it is. So which strip is failure to capture or failure to sense. So if we look at this first one, we want to look at where these pacer spikes are landing. So the first pacer spike looks like it could potentially be on that PR interval. And so we think that this is ventricularly paced because it's after the P wave. But if we look at the second pacer spike, it's going to be at the tail end of the QRS and almost into that T wave. And if we look at the next spike, it is right on top of our P wave and maybe even a little bit mixed into the T wave. So we have three various spikes. So if we think about the first one, we went over failure to capture, where the messages are delivered, but they're not being received. we're seeing that there is a pacer spike present, but there's really not any QRS to follow because they're kind of all over the map. So we would actually say that this would be failure to sense, because this is not really recognizing the patient's beats. It's causing bad timing. And then if we think about oversensing, it's too sensitive. So it'd be reading the waves of the artifact as a sign not to pace. So this rhythm right here is going to be our undersensing. And then we'll look at this next rhythm. We'll look at that first spike, and this is coming off of that T wave. And there's really nothing after that. It's kind of just a pause. The second spike is going to be kind of blended into the P wave and into the QRS. The next one's the same thing, and so forth as well. So if we look at this fifth spike right here, and it's after the T wave, we're seeing a pause with another spike and a pause. So we're noticing that there is no QRS that's happening after this pacer spike. So this message is being sent, but it's not really being received. So this is going to be our failure to capture rhythm. And this concludes our cardiac pacing lesson. I will see you in the next one.